Imagine a world stripped of its fairy tales, where the crown is not a symbol of grace but a catalyst for carnage, and the queen is not a benevolent mother to her people but a specter of death. We are often taught to picture queens as figures of elegance, diplomacy, and maternal strength. But history, in its unvarnished brutality, tells a different story. It reveals that the capacity for absolute tyranny knows no gender. It shows us women who, when armed with unlimited power, unleashed reigns of terror so profound they carved their names into the annals of infamy with daggers and poison. These are the stories of queens whose ambition was a fire that consumed everything in its path: faith, loyalty, and even the sacred bond between a mother and her child. Prepare to descend into the blood-soaked chronicles of 5 of history's most terrifying female monarchs. We will witness a queen who turned religious dissent into a national bonfire, burning hundreds of her own subjects alive. We will unmask another who wielded poison and perfume as instruments of assassination, orchestrating a citywide massacre from her palace window. We will journey to the ancient lands of the Rus to see a princess whose vengeance was as cruelly inventive as it was total, using birds as weapons to incinerate a city. We will stand in the opulent courts of the Byzantine Empire, where a mother's lust for the throne led her to commit the unthinkable, ordering her own son to be blinded. And finally, we will travel to the island of Madagascar, ruled by a queen whose paranoid cruelty was so extreme that she systematically annihilated half of her own kingdom's population. These are not cautionary tales or fictional villains. They are real women whose reigns of blood and terror serve as a grim testament to the fact that the darkest monsters in history are not always men. Mary I of England, the Queen of Fiery Faith. On a dreary November day in 1558, a palpable sense of relief swept across England. The nation's queen, Mary I, was dead. Her 5-year reign, one of the most notoriously bloody in the country's history, had finally come to an end. For half a decade, this devoutly, fiercely Catholic monarch had waged a holy war against her own people, transforming her realm into a hunting ground where the heresy of Protestantism was a capital crime, punishable by the agonizing death of being burned at the stake. Mary's name would become forever fused with a single, damning adjective: bloody. To understand the fire of Mary's reign, one must first understand the fire of her personal suffering. She was the daughter of the formidable King Henry VIII and his first wife, the Spanish Princess Catherine of Aragon. Mary's childhood was one of privilege, but it was shattered when her father, desperate for a male heir, sought to annul his marriage to her mother in favor of Anne Boleyn. The Pope's refusal led Henry to break from the Roman Catholic Church, an act that not only reshaped English religion but also devastated Mary's world. She was declared illegitimate, stripped of her title as princess, and separated from her beloved mother. Her half-brother, Edward VI, who succeeded their father, pushed the country even further into Protestantism. For years, Mary clung to her Catholic faith in defiance, living under constant pressure and suspicion. So, when she finally ascended to the throne in 1553, she carried with her not just a crown, but decades of perceived injustice and a burning, divine mission: to scour Protestantism from England and return the nation to the one true faith of Rome. She did not intend to persuade or to compromise. She intended to purify England with a baptism of fire. The Marian persecutions began in earnest in 1555, and for the next 3 years, the smell of burning flesh became a grim feature of English life. An estimated 300 souls, men, women, and even children, were consumed by the flames. No one was safe. Bishops and archbishops were dragged from their cathedrals, while humble weavers and artisans were pulled from their homes. Their crime was uniform: a refusal to renounce their Protestant beliefs. If you clung to the faith that Mary deemed heresy, you would burn. Her chosen method of execution was designed for maximum suffering. The victims were not granted a quick death. They were tied to a wooden stake, often surrounded by green, damp bundles of wood. This was a deliberate choice to ensure the fire would burn slowly, smoldering and smoking, literally roasting the condemned alive, prolonging their agony for as long as possible. Some of these horrific spectacles lasted for over an hour, the square filled with the desperate screams of the victims as they were slowly cooked in public view. It is said that Mary herself sometimes attended these executions, her face impassive or, as some whispered, visibly satisfied by the grim work she believed was God's will. Among the hundreds of victims, 3 names stand out as pillars of the English Reformation, whose deaths were meant to be a terrifying warning: Bishops Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. Latimer and Ridley were burned together, with Latimer famously crying out to his companion amidst the flames, "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out." His words proved prophetic, but it was the fate of Thomas Cranmer that was perhaps the most psychologically cruel. As the architect of many of the Protestant reforms, he was the crown jewel of Mary's targets. Under immense pressure, the aging archbishop was broken, signing several recantations denouncing his life's work. His execution was meant to be a final humiliation, but at the last moment, brought before the crowd to make his public submission, Cranmer stunned everyone. He dramatically withdrew his confessions, branding the Pope as Christ's enemy. He then declared that the hand that had signed the false recantations was unworthy and must be punished first. As the flames licked at his body, he fulfilled his vow, thrusting his right hand into the heart of the fire, holding it there until it was burned to a stump before the rest of his body was consumed. It was an act of breathtaking defiance that turned a state-sanctioned execution into a Protestant martyrdom. Mary had intended to burn away heresy, but in the end, she only succeeded in creating saints and cementing a legacy of blood and fire that would stain her name forever. Catherine de' Medici, the Serpent Queen of France. From the righteous flames of England, we travel to the perfumed and poisoned courts of 16th century France, where terror took on a more subtle, insidious form. Here, power was wielded not by a fanatical zealot, but by a cold, calculating political artist, Catherine de' Medici. She was a queen who mastered the arts of manipulation, espionage, and assassination, eliminating her enemies not with public executions, but with the silent finality of a poisoned glove or a whispered order in the dead of night. Her reign was a masterclass in shadow warfare, proving that the most terrifying threats are often the ones you never see coming. Born in Florence into the legendary Medici family, Catherine was a product of the Italian Renaissance's most ruthless political environment. The Medicis were bankers, popes, and princes who understood that power was a game played with daggers in the dark as much as with armies in the field. She brought this chilling education with her when she was married off to Henry, the second son of the French king. An outsider in the sophisticated French court, she was initially dismissed and overlooked. But these years in the shadows taught her to be patient, to observe, and to build her own intricate web of influence. When her husband, by then King Henry II, was killed in a freak jousting accident, Catherine's moment arrived. As queen mother to a series of young, weak sons, she stepped from the shadows to become the true, undisputed ruler of France. Her methods were as dark as they were sophisticated. She established a network of spies that permeated every corner of the court, using beautiful ladies-in-waiting, known as her Flying Squadron, to charm secrets out of powerful men. She was famously surrounded by astrologers and seers, most notably Nostradamus, using their prophecies to enhance her aura of mystical power and to justify her political moves. But her most feared weapon was poison. Legends swirled around her secret laboratories in the Louvre Palace, where her personal perfumer and poisoner, René Bianchi, was said to develop concoctions tailored for specific targets. An enemy of the queen might receive a beautiful pair of scented gloves, a rare book whose pages were dusted with a lethal powder, or an exquisite perfume. Death would come weeks or even months later, a slow, agonizing decline that baffled physicians and left behind no evidence. Only rumors that pointed back to the smiling, inscrutable Queen Mother. Catherine's entire reign was a precarious balancing act between the warring Catholic and Protestant, known as Huguenot, factions in France. But on the night of August 24, 1572, the mask of diplomacy fell away to reveal her most monstrous face. In a supposed act of reconciliation, Catherine had arranged the marriage of her daughter to the Protestant King Henry of Navarre. The great Huguenot nobles gathered in Catholic Paris for the wedding, a city simmering with religious hatred. After a failed assassination attempt on the Huguenot leader, Admiral Coligny, Catherine made a terrifying calculation. Fearing a Protestant uprising and seizing a brutal opportunity, she convinced her son, King Charles IX, to authorize a preemptive strike, the elimination of every Huguenot leader in the city. What followed was the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. As the church bells tolled in the pre-dawn hours, Catholic soldiers and assassins moved through the city, dragging Protestant nobles from their beds and slaughtering them in their nightclothes. The targeted assassinations quickly spiraled into a citywide explosion of sectarian violence. Catholic mobs, incited by years of hatred, poured into the streets, hunting down anyone suspected of being a Protestant. Men, women, and children were butchered in their homes and on the streets. The cobblestones of Paris ran red with blood, and for days, the Seine River was choked with thousands of floating corpses. Accounts claim that Catherine de' Medici watched the carnage from a window in the Louvre Palace, her expression unreadable, as the city she commanded turned into a slaughterhouse. When news reached the Vatican, Pope Gregory XIII was so pleased that he ordered a special celebratory mass and had a medal struck to commemorate the Catholic triumph. For Catherine, it was not a tragedy. It was a brutally successful political maneuver, a permanent stain on her legacy that cemented her reputation as the Serpent Queen. Olga of Kiev, the Saint of Vengeance. Leaving the gilded treachery of Renaissance Europe, we journey back further, to the harsh, primal world of the 10th century Kievan Rus. Here we meet a ruler whose cruelty was not born of political calculation or religious fervor, but of a deeply personal and epic vengeance. Princess Olga of Kiev, later sainted by the Orthodox Church for her efforts in bringing Christianity to her land, first secured her rule through one of the most savage, creative, and terrifying campaigns of revenge ever recorded. In the year 945, her husband, Prince Igor of Kiev, was brutally murdered by a Slavic tribe known as the Drevlians. He had been attempting to collect an extortionate amount of tribute from them, and they ambushed and killed him, an act of defiance against Kievan authority. The Drevlians, flush with their success, made a fatal miscalculation. Believing Olga to be a helpless widow, they sent a delegation of their 20 most distinguished men to Kiev with a proposal that Olga marry their leader, Prince Mao, and thereby bring all of Kievan Rus under Drevlian control. They had come to claim a queen. They would instead meet a monster of their own making. Olga's revenge unfolded in 4 distinct, horrifying acts. She greeted the 20 Drevlian ambassadors with a disarming warmth, appearing to accept their proposal. She told them they deserved a great honor and that her people would carry them in their own boats to her palace the next day. The proud Drevlians agreed. But overnight, Olga commanded her men to dig a deep, wide trench in the palace courtyard. The next morning, as the Drevlians were carried aloft in their boats, puffed up with pride, they were brought directly to the pit and thrown in, boats and all. As they struggled in the ditch, Olga leaned over the edge and, with chilling calm, reportedly asked them if they found the honor to their liking. When they screamed for mercy, she simply gave the order to bury them alive. But she was only beginning. Olga sent a message back to the Drevlians, stating that she had accepted their prince's proposal but required a retinue of their finest nobles and warriors to escort her with proper ceremony. The Drevlians, unaware of their first delegation's fate, foolishly complied, sending their best men to Kiev. Upon their arrival, Olga invited the weary travelers to refresh themselves in a large bathhouse before presenting themselves to her. Once the Drevlians were all inside, washing and steaming, Olga's soldiers barred the doors from the outside. She then ordered the bathhouse to be set on fire, burning them all alive inside the wooden structure. The third stage of her revenge was even more audacious. Olga traveled with her army to Drevlian territory, announcing that she wished to hold a traditional funeral feast near the mound where her husband was buried, to mourn him properly before marrying their prince. The remaining Drevlian leaders, still unsuspecting, agreed. A great feast was held, and Olga's attendants served the Drevlians vast quantities of mead, encouraging them to drink heavily in Igor's honor. When the Drevlians were completely intoxicated, passed out, and defenseless, Olga gave a signal. She and her guards drew their weapons and walked among the drunken men, massacring them where they lay. Chronicles claim that 5,000 Drevlians were slaughtered in a single night of blood-soaked mourning. The final act was the total destruction of the Drevlian people. In 946, Olga laid siege to their capital city, Iskorostan. After a year, the city still held, so Olga offered a shockingly generous peace. She told the exhausted citizens she no longer sought revenge. Her thirst was quenched. Instead of gold or furs, she asked only for a small, symbolic tribute: 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from every house in the city. The Drevlians, confused but immensely relieved, quickly gathered the birds and sent them to her. Olga's genius then revealed its terrible purpose. She instructed her soldiers to tie a small piece of sulfur-bound cloth to the leg of each bird. As dusk fell, they lit the cloths and released the birds. Instinctively, the pigeons and sparrows flew straight back to their nests in the eaves, stables, and thatched roofs of Iskarostan's wooden houses. Within hours, the entire city was a roaring inferno. As panicked men, women, and children fled the flames, Olga's army was waiting. They captured those trying to escape, killing the men and selling the women and children into slavery, wiping the Drevlian capital from the face of the earth. Irene of Athens, the empress who stole the light. Our journey now takes us to the glittering, treacherous heart of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, a city of gold, silk, and conspiracies. Here we find a story of cruelty so intimate and so profound it eclipses massacres and wars. It is the tale of Empress Irene, a mother whose lust for power was so absolute that she committed one of history's most shocking crimes, arranging for her own son to be blinded so that she could steal his throne. This was not an act of statecraft or vengeance against an external foe. It was the ultimate violation of the natural order, a mother's ambition consuming her own child. Irene's story begins with legitimate authority. When her husband, Emperor Leo IV, died in 780, she was named regent for their son, Constantine VI, who was merely 10 years old. For the next 17 years, Irene ruled the vast Byzantine Empire in his name, and she ruled it well. She was a shrewd and capable politician, navigating the complex currents of the imperial court with a steady hand. She held power longer than many male emperors had, proving her competence to all. But this long taste of absolute authority became a poison. When Constantine reached the age of 27, a grown man ready and eager to claim his birthright, his mother refused to step aside. A bitter and dangerous conflict erupted between mother and son. Constantine, increasingly frustrated, tried to assert his independence and dismiss his mother from power. Irene reacted not like a retiring regent, but like a threatened monarch. She activated her deep network of influence within the palace, organizing a conspiracy against her own flesh and blood. She found willing allies in ambitious generals and powerful court eunuchs who had grown accustomed to her rule and preferred the experienced empress to the untested young emperor. The stage was set for an act of unparalleled betrayal. On the 15th of August, 797, Irene's plan reached its horrifying climax. Her soldiers seized Emperor Constantine VI in the hallowed halls of the imperial palace. In a move of calculated psychological cruelty, they dragged him not to a common dungeon, but to the Porphyry Chamber, the magnificent purple room where imperial children were born. It was in the very room that had sanctified his right to rule that this right would be horrifically extinguished. There, by the express command of his mother, who was reportedly present to witness her victory, the soldiers carried out their gruesome task. They took red-hot irons and burned out Constantine's eyes, plunging him into a world of permanent darkness. The method was chosen with surgical precision. Under Byzantine law, a mutilated person could not rule. By blinding her son, Irene had politically neutered him, removing him from the line of succession without the scandal of a direct execution. While Constantine survived the initial torture, his mangled body gave out a few weeks later, likely due to infection from his wounds, making his mother a matricide in all but name. Irene had won. She became the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire as a sovereign in her own right, boldly taking the masculine title of Basileus, or emperor. She had reached the pinnacle of power, but at the cost of her soul, forever remembered as the mother who stole her son's crown by stealing his sight. Ranavalona I, the Mad Queen of Madagascar. For our final descent into darkness, we travel to the island nation of Madagascar in the 19th century, to the court of a queen whose reign represents the terrifying synthesis of all the cruelties we have witnessed. Queen Ranavalona I combined Mary's religious persecution, Catherine's paranoia, Olga's brutality, and Irene's ruthlessness into a 33-year reign of terror so extreme that it defies belief. She was a monarch whose isolationist fury and sadistic creativity led to the systematic destruction of her own people, earning her the title of the Mad Queen of Madagascar. Ranavalona seized power in 1828 through a palace coup following the death of her husband, King Radama I. Her first act was to declare total war on the modernizing, pro-European policies of her predecessor. She was determined to purge Madagascar of all foreign influence, which she viewed as a corrupting poison. Christian missionaries were expelled, foreign trade was shut down, and the island was sealed off from the outside world. Her goal was to preserve the traditional Malagasy way of life, and she would enforce this vision with unimaginable brutality. Her methods of execution were infamous for their sadistic creativity. Her primary tool for mass justice was the Tangina ordeal. Individuals accused of crimes, which could be as minor as using European soap or speaking her name incorrectly, were forced to swallow 3 pieces of a poisonous nut. If the accused managed to vomit all 3 pieces back up, they were declared innocent. If they could not, and died in agony from the poison, their guilt was proven. It is estimated that this grotesque ritual killed as many as 100,000 people during her reign, a staggering number. Ranavalona also delighted in public spectacle. For the entertainment of her court, prisoners were taken to the top of high cliffs and hurled to their death 60 meters below. Others were boiled alive in enormous cauldrons, had nails hammered into their heads, or were buried up to their necks and left to die of thirst under the African sun. More horrifying than individual executions was her state-sanctioned policy of genocide. Entire tribes or villages she deemed disloyal were marked for extermination. Her soldiers would surround a village, set fire to every building, and butcher anyone who tried to escape. Children were drowned in rivers or thrown from cliffs to wipe out entire bloodlines. The human cost of her 33-year rule was a demographic catastrophe. Historians estimate that during her time on the throne, the population of Madagascar was cut in half, plummeting from roughly 5 million people to 2.5 million. She also waged war on knowledge and progress, banning European technology and medicine. Schools were destroyed, books were burned, and hospitals were closed, ensuring her kingdom would remain isolated, even if it meant the death of her own subjects. Christians were hunted with particular zeal. Entire families were tortured and executed for the simple crime of possessing a Bible. The legacy of terror. These 5 queens, separated by centuries and continents, are united by a legacy of blood. Bloody Mary burned 300 of her subjects for their faith. Catherine de' Medici turned political assassination into a dark art and orchestrated massacres. Olga of Kiev enacted a vengeance so total it ended in the fiery annihilation of a city. Irene of Athens committed the ultimate betrayal for power, and Ranavalona presided over the extermination of half of her own country. Their stories stand as a chilling testament to the old axiom, absolute power corrupts absolutely, regardless of who holds it. They remain etched in history as some of its most hated figures, not merely for their cruelty, but because they so profoundly shattered the social expectations of their gender. In worlds that expected women to be maternal, gentle, and peaceful, these queens were forces of nature, violent, calculating, and utterly ruthless. They proved that the capacity for evil is not bound by gender. It is a human potentiality that, when combined with unlimited power and stripped of checks and balances, will inevitably produce tyrants. Their thrones were built on bone and their crowns were soaked in blood, and their stories continue to fascinate and horrify, serving as eternal reminders that history's greatest monsters can, and often do, wear a crown and gown.